If you think hydrogen peroxide, what's in this little bottle here, is the cure for all your gardening woes, you might want to think again. I'm Kevin from Epic Gardening, and over the years here on the channel, we have tested all sorts of different gardening myths, and today we are setting our sights on hydrogen peroxide, or H2O2. From soil sterilization to pest and disease control, hydrogen peroxide has been touted as the Swiss Army knife of gardening. But what if I told you that some of these miracle cures might actually be harming your plants and your soil? Not only have we tested it in our own gardens, but we dug into the science, the studies, and we're gonna separate fact from fiction in this video, show you where hydrogen peroxide actually works and where it is not so helpful. So let's get into it. Let's look at some of the claims made about hydrogen peroxide and its ability to disinfect soil and also aerate soil or give more oxygen and space between the soil particles. Both of these are very interesting claims. It'd be very cool if hydrogen peroxide could do that. But how would it even do that? How does hydrogen peroxide work? Well, it's H2O2. That's the molecular structure, very similar to water. It's just water with an extra oxygen atom, and it breaks down into water and oxygen when it comes into contact with things that it reacts to. And things that it reacts to are actually biological compounds. It can react to bacteria, fungi, these sorts of things, maybe stuff that you wouldn't want in your soil. I'm gonna start some seeds here. I don't want any bad bacteria, bad fungi that are gonna kill my seedlings. Then maybe I'll put some hydrogen peroxide on it, just like this. Well, when I do that, it's killing everything, not only the bad stuff, but all the beneficial bacteria and fungi that are also in here. And if you ask us here at Epic, myself, Jacques, other growers on our team, we don't really care if our soil is disinfected. Why? Because the second it's fully sterilized, it's going to get recolonized, and we don't even have that much control over what kind of bacteria or fungi it would get colonized by. So we sort of see it as kind of a moot point, like no real point in sterilizing unless you know you're working with a bad batch of soil. And if you know that, you could throw it in the oven, you could throw it in the microwave, and that would be a much cheaper and quicker way to guarantee that your soil is sterile. The next claim is that by dumping hydrogen peroxide, not just in a soil starting kit like this, but in your actual soil, it will help aerate the soil and add oxygen to the soil. And this is somewhat true, but it's one of those things where it's like not that important, not that effective, and a pretty expensive way to do it. Because when you dump it in the soil, it will react and it will create water and oxygen and sort of bubble. And the theory is that that will kind of bubble away the soil particles, add more oxygenation. But the truth is, if you're dealing with soil that needs aeration that bad, there are a lot of easier ways to do it. We've showed you a million on this channel before, coming through and tilling your soil, which I did a couple years ago in my backyard garden, and it was a really good idea for that particular season. Coming in and taking a little shovel and just lightly breaking up the soil, adding some compost in to make sure that it isn't as compact. You don't have to dump a bunch of hydrogen peroxide in to get that done. Next up, we have the idea of disinfecting your tools or maybe even pots that you're replanting and you don't want to spread infection. When you're doing a pruning job in the garden, it's actually somewhat important to disinfect your tools as you move from spot to spot. Think about powdery mildew, a pretty annoying fungal disease. If I came through, hit my squash over there, which has powdery mildew, and brought those spores over to another plant that's susceptible, then I'm just spreading disease and I'm making my whole life a lot harder. So people recommend disinfecting your tools, and one way to do that would be taking peroxide and kind of dumping it on the surface of the tool, maybe soaking it a little bit. Here's the problem. There's been studies done on all sorts of different cleaning agents. They looked at bleach, peroxide, pine sol, Lysol, Listerine even, and peroxide did not make the top of the list. In fact, what won was bleach. So if you want to disinfect your tools, which I recommend, what you should do is make a solution of bleach and water. 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, maybe in a mason jar or something. Soak your tools in for about a minute or so, and then the second that minute is up, rinse them off with fresh water immediately, because that solution is corrosive and you might start to rust away. Then you're good to go and you can move on to your next task. If you don't have that, don't want to use bleach for some reason, you can also use rubbing alcohol and just rub over the surface and move along to your next task. Peroxide does not work that well for this situation. I've been trash talking hydrogen peroxide this whole video, and that ends right now because I've got some squash leaves with powdery mildew on them, a deadly fungal disease. It's in almost everyone's gardens. It's been in my garden more than I would care to admit. And we found a study that seems to show some effectiveness here, but it's very interesting. So what they did is they took some cucumbers, they transplanted the cucumbers, and then they sprayed them with a mixture of hydrogen peroxide at, get this, 1 part of hydrogen peroxide to 60 parts of water. Sprayed them at that moment in time, 1 week later and 2 weeks later, and then after about 90 days, they looked at the batch of cucumbers that were and weren't sprayed, and they saw a decrease in powdery mildew from 90% all the way down to 11%. So that's pretty interesting. Now that's just one study and that's just one plant. Squash isn't a cucumber, a lettuce isn't a cucumber. These dilution ratios, as we investigated, seem to be pretty important. So it might depend on the type of plant, but we feel comfortable saying in the morning or evening, come out, splash a tiny bit of hydrogen peroxide into water and spray these plants and see if you see an effect, and maybe even report back, because a study's a study. But the experiments that we do in the garden and you do are what's really going to tell us if this has an effect at all. Then you have another really annoying disease called root rot. This is something that you might get with seedlings or with young transplants in soil that's overwatered. And when the soil gets overwatered, it gets waterlogged, which means there's not as much oxygen. And then these water molds can thrive in low oxygen environments. They take over the roots and they rot out the roots. So knowing what we know about hydrogen peroxide, you think, well, if I pour it in there, it will not only break down into water and oxygen, so at least I get some oxygen in that low oxygen environment, but also it should kill the water mold. And that is technically true. It would do that, but the truth is with root rot and with some of these overwatering based diseases, the simplest solution is to solve the overwatering problem, not to dump even more stuff in that will break down into more water. Now we are on to one of the most common use cases for hydrogen peroxide. It's what you see recommended all the time. And to demonstrate, I've got my little houseplant jungle. These are these moss poles, and I'm growing some rare aeroids here. Yes, I grow houseplants, my friends. I've got a Philodendron Espiritu Sancti, kind of a rare one. And then I really like this guy here. This is a Cebu Blue Pothos from the Philippines, which I'm half Filipino, so a little bit of my namesake there. But fungus gnats are something that can plague a lot of houseplant owners as well as a lot of people starting seeds. They're these little gnats that can kind of burrow into the surface of soil, lay their eggs, and they're very, very frustrating and very annoying. And so hydrogen peroxide is recommended to kill them. Now, does it work? It kind of does, kind of doesn't. Similar story to a lot of our other examples, where it will kill off a lot of the algae that you will sometimes see growing on the surface of nutrient-rich soils that are exposed to light. Very similar to growing a houseplant in a pot. And killing off that algae will kill the food source for the fungus gnats. But there's a much simpler way to combat fungus gnats, and it's with a product called mosquito bits. BT, Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis. That is the sort of very specific bacterium that is used in mosquito bits. And when you soak mosquito bits in water, what will happen is that bacteria will make it into the water, and then you water with that, and it will kill off all the fungus gnat larvae really easily. So again, not a good use for hydrogen peroxide. Next up, we have one of the weirder claims out there. We all know that soaking seeds can speed up germination, but the claim is that soaking seeds in hydrogen peroxide can speed it up even further. Trust me, we did our digging on this one. We could not find many studies that supported this. All we really found is that soaking in hydrogen peroxide for 4 hours may have increased the germination speed, but soaking for 8 hours actually decreased it. And in other crops like lettuce, it decreased it no matter how long you soaked. I'm kneeling here in probably my greatest shameful patch in my garden. In fact, I think a guy named Eric actually was supposed to be in charge of this, but that's neither here nor there. It's my Bermuda grass. It's my weed. I don't want it here. And a lot of people will say that you can use hydrogen peroxide to kill weeds. And this is effective if you get a 10% strength or more hydrogen peroxide, which is kind of hard to find, and you dump it on the ground, it will tend to kill the weeds. But again, that's hard to find. It can be a little bit expensive, and there's a much simpler way to do it. First of all, you could just weed the weeds, but we found pretty good effectiveness by using vinegar, 30% strength, plain vinegar, very cheap. You can get it pretty much anywhere. And if you dump that on the ground, it breaks down into safe compounds and kills the weeds. So we've been using this in our Bermuda patch, not necessarily in this area, but over by the front fence, just to make sure that we keep everything killed down there, because we're not going to plant anything there anyways. We just want some nice, clean looking mulch. So I mentioned this is my biggest shame in the garden, or maybe it's Eric's biggest shame, but I want to show you my biggest pride. So here we are in the backyard pond, which I put in about 3 years ago, and the whole point was to bring more wildlife into the space. The birds, the bugs, all of those native creatures are finally back here in the garden, in the sky, in the water, and around this space, which brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Planet Wild. Planet Wild is a community-supported organization with an amazing YouTube channel, by the way, that partners with conservation organizations around the world to protect and preserve nature. And the projects they do are quite frankly epic. One of the ones that they recently did is rewild a power line and add an insect highway, and all of this is supported by member donations. I personally supported Planet Wild at the Legend tier, $720 a year, And unlike most charities, I don't have to wonder, I wonder if that's going to like an administrative salary or something, because I can go check the app and the YouTube video and they will tell me what that money helped support. And I've been a member for a while now, so I just got an email saying that the most recent video, which was bringing sharks back from the dead and reintroducing them to different ecosystems, is partly where my money went, which is really cool to see. So you can support from a small amount of money a year all the way up to a large amount of money. You can cancel anytime. You are not stuck with Planet Wild. And because we believe in this so much here at Epic, I mean, our mission is to help you grow and help ecosystems grow around the world. We are going to cover the first month for the first 200 people to sign up using either the link in the description or the QR code right here. So it's a super fun way to support conservation projects around the world and not just in your own garden. You can check those 2 Planet Wild videos out right here. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.